The extent of the war between Russia and Ukraine now worries even Moscow leader Vladimir Putin. The main reason for this is the air attacks in Russia, the constant flights of unmanned aerial vehicles in the Russian airspace. And this situation creates a socio-psychological tension throughout Russia. These attacks often targeted cities close to the Ukrainian land border or between the Crimea and the Russian border lines. The effects of the war went beyond the Crimean Peninsula to the Sea of Azov. Now the war has reached the Russian cities of Krasnodar, Bryansk, and Rostov. The Russian army's missile retaliation against the cities of Kiev and southern Ukraine did not deter the Ukrainians. Cities such as Krasnodar, Rostov, Bryansk, and Belgorod were among the regions where the attacks were intense. While the targeting of these cities with offensive actions led to the evacuation of Russian citizens, such situations also gradually reduced the trust in the Moscow administration. The Russian citizens who started to feel the war at home began to understand much better the extent of the fire surrounding Russia with these attacks. At the same time, Ukraine launched a large-scale wave of attacks on Russia's southern and western cities to cut Russian logistics lines and paralyze the main supply routes of the Russian army. The most critical of these took place in the Krasnodar and Rostov regions in the south. The war had now moved to the cities of Russia. Huge explosions occurred yesterday at the large Russian military airfield in Krasnodar, Russia. A powerful explosion was reported on Sunday near Primorsko-Akhtarsk airport in the Krasnodar region of southern Russia. A photograph of the 11-meter wide and 4-meter deep crater was located about 200 meters from the airport. Krasnodar lies on either side of the Sea of Azov and is close to the Crimea, which Russia legally annexed from Ukraine in 2014. Local residents of Primorsko-Akhtarsk reportedly heard a loud explosion at around 4 o'clock. According to eyewitnesses, a column of black smoke rose into the sky. The Kremlin-affiliated mass telegram channel said Russian air defense is shot down a missile aimed at attacking the Space's fuel depot on July 2nd, an allegation that has not been independently verified. Later that day, Krasnodar Territory Governor Veniamin Kondratyev said that no casualties or damage had been reported. Kondratyev did not mention the cause of the explosions, saying that all the details became clear. Russia is reportedly using Primorsko-Akhtarsk airspace to launch Iranian-made shot ammunition against Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, if launched from the airfield, it takes about an hour for these kamikaze drones to reach Ukrainian soil. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia launched Tate-shot drones and 3-caliber cruise missiles overnight on July 2nd. In a recent airstrike on Ukraine, the army reported that they had shot them all down. According to the Regional Military Administration, the wreckage of the drones crashed into 3 residences in Kiev Oblast, injuring a man. This was perceived as a revenge counterattack of the Ukrainian Air Force against Russia since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Russia has repeatedly attacked civilian targets, including Ukraine's infrastructure, with drones and missiles. Also on Wednesday, June 28, explosions were heard in the temporarily occupied Melitopol Zaporizhia region. Initially, the arrival of the Russians at a military base and a warehouse used by the enemy for weapons logistics was recorded. The Novocherkassk thermal power plant in Russia's Rostov Oblast burned down. Russian state news agency TASS reported on June 14. Locals heard an explosion before the fire started around 1:40 p.m. local time. The epicenter of the fire was reported in the 6th unit of the factory, then spread to the 5th unit and covered at least 400 meters squared. Russian sources wrote that the fire broke out due to non-compliance with safety precautions during repair work and caused the explosion. TASS wrote that 3 people were injured with burns and 150 were evacuated. At around 3 p.m. local time, Russian media reported that the fire was under control. According to Novocherkassk Zagodnya, news of an airstrike on the facility began to circulate on social media. The city of Novocherkassk is located about 70 kilometers from the temporarily occupied Ukrainian border and 45 kilometers from the Russian regional center, Rostov-on-Don. Since February 24, 2022, when Russia's all-out war against Ukraine began, there have been numerous reports of fires across Russia and other incidents that some believe were carried out by the Ukrainian army or local partisan groups. On the 13th of June, fires were reported at an oil depot in Krasnodar and a production facility in St. Petersburg, Rostov, and Krasnodar on the coast of the Sea of Azov. Forming the southern cities of Russia are the main supply points of the Russian army on the Crimean and Donbass fronts. After these suspicious and mysterious situations, the Moscow authorities lost control and had to watch the attacks of Russian cities like a spectator. After these dramatic attacks, the Russians transformed Crimea from a popular seaside resort into a military defensive line, with satellite images showing the peninsula overrun with anti-tank barriers and crisscrossed by reinforced trench nets because the Russian authorities thought that the axis of the attacks would gradually surround the Crimea. The inhabitants of the peninsula were also quite worried about this possibility, although they did not explicitly state this. In addition, the attacks on Russian cities created chaos, panic, and tension lines in these cities. Last month, Krasnodar and Rostov suffered a series of attacks. Last month, Russian air defense systems went on alert after the Ukrainian drone and missile attack on Rostov. The governor of Rostov Oblast in the Russian Federation, Vasily Golubev, claimed that the Russian air defense shot down a Ukrainian missile in the Morozovsk region where there is a military airspace. Ukrainian military channels reported an attack on the Morozovsk military airfield in Rostov. In other words, these statements confirm that the Ukrainians had hit the Russian military airbase in Rostov. According to a set of assumptions, the Ground-2 tactical missiles struck the Russian military base in Rostov, because the range of these missiles is enough to hit from such a distance. But there are no official results on this yet. When we consider all these attacks, the situation of Russia looks deplorable. Currently, Russian citizens are quite uneasy about this war led by Vladimir Putin. The residents of the Russian region, who became very uneasy with these attacks, began to think that such situations could become much more effective in the future. The next situation is which Russian city was involved in the alleged offensive operation plan of the Ukrainian forces. Many experts point to Crimea again as the center of the next attack because this peninsula is seen as the key to the war. Ukrainian leader Zelensky is very sensitive about the retake of Crimea, but it's also possible that Russian cities such as Krasnodar and Belgorod will be attacked again before the Crimea. The reason for this is the reports of intelligence sources. According to some data, the presence of resistance groups defending the Ukrainian army, both in Krasnodar and in Russian cities such as Belgorod and Bryansk, has greatly increased. People now want to end Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine by carrying out acts of sabotage. In addition to these efforts, the air attacks of the Ukrainian army on the Russian cities on the border lines are causing the wind of the war to blow in favor of Kiev because after these striking offensive operations, the Russians began to become very quiet on many front lines in Ukraine. Usually, Russian troops hold defensive positions on the front lines. In summary, thanks to all these efforts, the Ukrainians are advancing step by step to the final victory. The steppes of Eastern Europe continue to resonate with the Ukrainian cries of freedom. Russia is learning perhaps the hardest lesson in its history on the territory of Ukraine. The attacks of the Russian army in eastern Ukraine were thwarted by the strong resistance of the Ukraine. With the advance of the Russian army at a standstill, Vladimir Putin began to look for alternative solutions. Putin is knocking on Lukashenko in China, but he can't get what he wants. Western warnings and sanctions on Belarus are reducing Lukashenko's influence in the Ukraine war. On the other hand, Russia is turning to China due to military ammunition deficiencies and production impossibilities. But so far, China has not responded to the Russian army's lack of ammunition. Any country that helps the Russian army in this regard does not risk facing heavy economic sanctions from the West. On the other hand, increasing Turkey's power in the Black Sea, Poland's control of the Belarusian border by increasing its power on the Kaliningrad border and closing the Belarusian borders, limits Russia's aggressive moves towards Eastern Europe. In addition, Finland in the far north is now a member of the NATO alliance, and Russia has lost its menacing trump card there. At the moment, we see that Biden, Erdogan, Macron, von der Leyen and Marcellus Morawiecki are working hard to limit and control the moves of Putin and Lukashenko. On the other hand, we see in Zelensky that Putin took critical steps to limit his moves in Ukraine and to corner the Russian army. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Galuzin suggested that the draft peace treaty proposes to provide security guarantees to Ukraine, but that guarantees can only be provided in conjunction with other conditions. Commenting on Ukraine's prospects for accession to the European Union, Galuzin claimed that in the past few years, the bloc has transformed from an independent, neutral association for economic integration to a militarized international entity hostile to Russia. In fact, this was the proof of how isolated Russia has become from the world with its unjust occupation policies. Because, as you know, Finland had recently joined the NATO military alliance, creating the possibility of disrupting Russia's invasion plans for Ukraine. Both countries with a 1,340-kilometer border are militarily adequate. Now Finland is becoming a full NATO member from being Russia's buffer zone was a historic decision that dragged the Russians into a quagmire from a diplomatic point of view. On the other hand, with Finland's accession to NATO, the Russian Navy is likely to experience serious difficulties in the Baltic Sea. Currently, the bold and strict policies of Estonia on this issue and the maneuvering abilities of Russian Navy members in the Baltic were severely restricted. But in our opinion, if we evaluate all this data, the two countries that have the most capacity to hinder Russia's plans in Ukraine are the USA and Turkey. First of all, if we look at the US side, the nearly $50 billion military and financial aid provided by the Biden administration to the Ukrainian army is one of the most concrete proofs of this. In addition, it seems that the US's latest sending of Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine will change the balance in the war. In addition to military aid, the United States is characterized as the primary country to block Russia's use of nuclear weapons because Washington succeeds in neutralizing the Russian Navy, which is equipped with nuclear-tipped missiles by Russian leader Vladimir Putin, both in the Mediterranean and in the Indo-Pacific maritime areas. In addition, the U.S. Navy forces, which draws attention to the recent military activity of Russia in the Sea of Japan and is a deterrent in this regard, is doing its duty for now. The US is not blocking this threatening Russian presence just to protect Ukraine or Taiwan and guarantee their freedom. The USA carries out all these efforts to eliminate the emergence of New World Order under the threat of Russia in China. In addition, the Washington administration recently announced that it has achieved a total of $58 billion in revenue by applying one of the largest sanctions in its history to Russia. After this striking statement, where this income will be used has attracted much more attention. Indeed, Washington claimed that $58 billion in revenue from the sanctions imposed on Russia could be used for the reconstruction of Ukraine. If that happens, all the efforts that Russian leader Vladimir Putin has tried so far will be in vain. Putin will only wear out his army and citizens for nothing. Currently, the war strategy of the Russian leader so far has also dragged his army and nation into a period of complete collapse. But if Putin persists in his invasion plans for Ukraine, much worse days will await Russia. Besides the USA, another country that has the potential to discourage the Russian leader from the invasion of Ukraine is Turkey. As we mentioned, there are many reasons why Turkey is in this deterrent position. Let's start with the strategic location of this country, which is one of the rulers of the Middle East. Geography. Turkey is currently described as a bridge between Asia and Europe. Turkish leader Erdogan has wisely used this strategic position to moderate the policies of Russian leader Vladimir Putin since the beginning of the war. If you remember, the last Turkish leader, Erdogan, solved the crisis regarding the Black Sea Grain Corridor Agreement, again, thanks to his critical mediator role. With the expiration of the agreement on May 18th, a new crisis is expected. However, we can witness the unifying and conciliatory role of Turkey on this issue. Again, Erdogan can convince Putin again about the grain deal and bring him to the table for this issue. Besides the grain agreement, Turkey has now taken a new step to dissuade Russia from this war. Erdogan had a meeting with Putin and a phone call with Putin. Erdogan demanded the end of the Ukraine war. This was a clear warning. Some people considered this as the last ultimatum from Turkey to Russia. But Turkey's move on this issue was quite logical. The Ankara government wanted the war to end, but was also considering the interests of Europe and its own on natural gas and energy. Europe has already had bad times over the past winter due to the embargo decisions that Russia tried to implement in order to avoid such a situation again. Turkey is trying to lead Russia to a more peaceful path. In fact, Erdogan's undertaking this task is a good advantage for the countries of the world. The reason for this is the recognition of the Turkish president by many countries around the world, and, most importantly, Putin's sensitive approach to Erdogan. In recent years, both countries have experienced volatile relations with economic cooperation and common interests in Syria, regional clashes that conflict with different restrictive perspectives such as regional security. But no matter what, the relationship between the two was not damaged too much, as Erdogan was in a deterrent position and Turkey was one of the strongest military forces in the Middle East and Europe. Especially considering that Akkuyu nuclear power plant has come to the fore recently. Russian leader Vladimir Putin can never take the risk of undermining this cooperation. Kirill Komarov, Deputy General Manager of the Russian public nuclear energy company Rosatom, which will build Turkey's first nuclear power plant, announced that the seismic studies for the Akkuyu nuclear power plant have been completed and that the power plant will be officially put into operation in 2023. For this reason, Russia's follow-up of a policy that Turkey does not approve of may tighten the ropes between the two countries. As we all know, the possibility of Putin not being able to take this risk is based on the Ukraine war. Since the Russian economy does not have the resources to invest in its own defense industry at the moment, it can never ignore the economic income it will provide from an important country like Turkey. But Turkey's stance on this issue is quite clear. Turkey still keeps both the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles closed to Russian warships. In addition, Turkey wants this war to end at least as much as the United States. Whatever the economic relations between Russia and Turkey, Erdogan and the Turkish administration's approach to Russia versus Ukraine is clear. Erdogan has proven this very clearly by the Turkish administration's bringing a brand new power to the Black Sea, TCG Anadolu amphibious aircraft carrier, and by building the flagship of the Ukrainian Navy. In summary, Turkey is still a brave ally of Ukraine. If yesterday Ukrainians cleared up to 1 kilometer of trenches on the northern Bakhmut flank, then today, Ukrainians liberated 3 square kilometers on the southern Bakhmut flank. The day started with Prigozhin's announcement that Ukrainians launched a powerful counterattack south of the Ivanovsky highway bridge, the Russian defense, and penetrated it by half a kilometer already by 10 a.m. He said that he received numerous messages from his soldiers, saying that the Russian 72nd Brigade abandoned their positions and ran away the moment they saw Ukrainian tanks and armored fighting vehicles. He also said that the Russian Ministry of Defense deceived him and after the first day cut off supplies. Once again, Prigozhin raised the alarm and said that now the Wagner Group is not only with no ammunition, but also with bare flanks, which Ukrainians will definitely try to capitalize on to launch the counteroffensive. Closer to the evening, the Ukrainian side confirmed that almost everything Prigozhin said is true and showed combat footage where Russian soldiers are indeed abandoned in their positions and running away before Ukrainian assault units even reached their positions. It looks like the emotional buildup of anxious anticipation of the Ukrainian counteroffensive broke the Russian spirit, and they thought that staying on the zero line is a sure death. Nonetheless, Ukrainian fighters also reported that at least 20% of troops belong not to regular army, but to the Wagner Group, and that they abandoned their positions and ran together. The assault was conducted by the fighters from the 3rd Assault Brigade. As you might still remember, these were the fighters that broke the momentum of the Russian advancement in the Chroma 4 region and cleared a lot of trenches. Soon they were relocated to an unspecified area, which turned out to be the southern flank. Ukrainians assaulted Russian trenches with tanks and armored vehicles and eliminated those who did not flee, which amounted to 64 troops when the report came out and is likely higher now as the operation continues. As a result, Ukrainians completely eliminated the second Russian bridgehead on the western side of the canal. Previously, Russians also had another bridgehead near the forest, which Ukrainians eliminated around a month ago. Prigozhin was furious at the 72nd Brigade. He said that his army lost 500 men to establish a powerful bridgehead. The positions were ready and all the 72nd Brigade needed to do was to use the trenches and hold the defense. But in one day they lost half of it because of the collapse in front line. Gazprom's private military company refused to go to these positions as they did not want to deal with the falling apart front. The problems on the flanks exacerbated the difficulties that Wagner forces are facing in the city itself. To date, Ukrainian soldiers reported that they noticed that Russians started moving into the gray zone, which made the Ukrainians expect a huge storm in operation during the night. However, it did not happen because of the extensive HIMARS raid across the whole Bakhmut direction. It was reported that Ukrainians district, multiple ammunition depots, forces and equipment concentrated rapidly, creating shortages. These shortages likely forced the Wagner Group to reconsider its plans and go on the defensive, especially given the high level of uncertainty and the necessity to face the imminent large-scale mechanized assault or the counter-offensive operation.